Hello, my name is Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm talking about the trap of aloofness. I find that in various spiritual traditions that there's this idea of somehow becoming untouched by the world. As if you should not react to anything that happens. And I think this is a serious myth and flaw. It's a misunderstanding. It is not a matter of no longer reacting or not feeling or otherwise engaging with the world. It is realizing much more deeply that there is no other. And this brings equanimity. Often you hear about equanimity, and everybody thinks, well, that means everything should be equal. I mean, there's even Hindu stories of looking upon a gold nugget and a stone in the ground as the same. And so they throw both in the stream because it doesn't matter. And it's a cute story, but I think it propagates a error. If you see everything is equal, if there's equanimity, it doesn't mean you throw your money away or throw away a gold nugget into a stream. It does not necessarily mean that. It just means that you realize it's a game. You realize the game of life. You look at the gold nugget, you look at the stone or chunk of coal or whatever you're comparing it to, and you realize that they are not separate. They are not other. There is no one that is higher or lower. They are equal in that they are the same thing. It is just Brahman, different forms. But in this game of life, we arbitrarily assign different values to each. We say the gold nugget is valuable and is worth X amount of money. And we say that the stone is worthless. And it's an arbitrary decision, really. I mean, if there was an alternative reality with a weird little twist of fate, and let's say some ugly little stone happened to be rare. It wasn't particularly pretty, but it was rare. There's a good chance that that stone would be said to be valuable. It might be the very same stone you pick up off the ground now and go, this is just a normal stone. But because the societal rules say, well, this is rare in some way, therefore valuable, it's valued higher. And it's all arbitrary. I mean, and a lot of times made up. I mean, diamonds, for example, are considered prized, but they're not particularly rare. They're actually heavily controlled where they're mined to make sure not too many get out into the market. It's an arbitrary created scarcity in order to drive up the value of the stone. Really, it's not particularly rare. There's other things that are more rare. But this idea of rarity being valuable is interesting too. That somehow if there is less of it, it's far more valuable. But that's also looking at a very narrow lens. Less of what? You know, it's kind of like if you compare two things that are more complex, like two people. A lot of times we get caught up in this game and we go, well, I feel inferior to everybody, or I feel superior to everybody, whatever the case may be. No one is better or worse in all areas of life. I mean, you might be looking at one person and they go, well, they've got more money, so they're better. But they might be as ugly as sin. Or you might be looking at the beauty of one and find out they got a horrible personality. We will cherry pick and pick certain traits and focus on those and say, I'm better or weaker than everybody else based on these, and overlook all the other traits. And really, that's just the arbitrary nature of our value judgments. But if you look at everything with equanimity, every person is fundamentally not other. Not other being the same. They are the same thing. Now, I'm not particularly pleased with equanimity as a term in total, because the root of it is the same as the root in equal. And so there's a certain equation with equanimity being everything's equal, which is also a illusion. In fact, nothing is equal. There isn't one exact duplicate of anything. Nothing is equal. There's always variation. To say something is equal is actually overlooking all the ways they're not equal. So, we are not equal. Things are not equal. I would say equal is the wrong way to look at it. You know, because some people actually like the phrase, well, no one's superior or inferior, we're all equal. And actually, they're in I forget which Eastern sage said this, but it's actually much closer to the truth. And he said, well, nothing's superior, nor inferior, nor equal. It's not superior, it's not inferior, but it's not equal either. And that's an important thing to realize. Nothing is equal. And so when everything is different, fundamentally everything is different. But a thing is just, like I said, in other videos I've hinted at this, a thing is just an arbitrary mental segmentation. We've taken this part out of reality and called it a thing, a separate thing. But actually there are no separate things. It's more like looking at a quilt in a certain way, and you've got all these various threads making the design, or say a tapestry. And you could say the thing is a single thread, but even that isn't true. Especially if it's like cloth and it's the same thread woven back and forth. The coloring on the thread could be varied, but it may be the same thread, depending on how it's made. And so it is not a matter of non-varying. Equal doesn't mean they're equal. It doesn't say there isn't variation. That would be wrong too, because there's obvious variation. So what is equanimity really? If it's not equal, and it's not saying there is no real variation, it's simply pointing at the fact that it's all not other. It's Advaita. It's not other. It's non-dual. And so whether we think we're looking at two things or not, they are the same. And in that sense, you can think of it as they're equal. And so yes, a gold nugget and a chunk of coal are the same. It's just energy. Energy formulated in different patterns, but it's just energy all the same. And if you actually, you could actually, they might be different sizes physically, but actually you could potentially have the exact same amount of energy in two different things. And they really would be the equal amounts of energy, just the pattern would be different. But I mean, these are just different ways of looking at it. So it's not, like I said, the trick is not falling into the trap of things being equal or overlooking differentiation. And so this, I think, contributes to the disengagement, because this is where aloofness comes in. Because so many spiritual people think that upon enlightenment, upon awakening, you'll somehow become untouched. Regardless what happens in the world, it does not affect you. I've sometimes heard similar things to this. And in Zen Buddhism, they would call this being a stone Buddha. You know, you see a stone Buddha, it's made out of stone, it's sitting there, you hit it on the head, you know, nothing happens. It's unaffected. They said that is not the point. The point is not to be a stone Buddha. The point is to be living Buddha. And so to be a living Buddha, you're not disengaged from the world. To be a living Buddha, you're hit on the head, ouch, you react. The reactions may not be the same, so I'm not saying you're immediately going to react in suffering or react in anything like that. But there's still a reaction. There's still an engagement. So it's not a matter of being untouched by the world. I mean, the world would be a really sad place, really, if you think about it. If you're trying to get to this place where you're totally untouched and you're unaffected by anything. It becomes so meh. So just, you know. And some people actually will talk about, well, yeah, it's when there's no sadness or joy, or sadness and happiness. They'll pair those two and say both are gone. And so what are you left with? You're left with, meh, whatever. I don't know about you, but that does not sound like the way I want to live. The whole idea of just floating through life untouched, unaffected, just existing, waiting for the end of this body. Because that's what you'd be doing. You'd just be existing until this body ceases to exist, and then that's the end of that game. And so instead of that kind of untouched aloofness, which again I think is a trap, the point is to stay engaged. And there's a certain, I guess, rising above it because you've seen through the game. If you've seen through the game and you're looking at things with equanimity, as I said, seeing them as the same, seeing the world game arbitrarily setting values that don't really exist, then there's a certain transcendence of the game. It's not that you're not affected by the game of life. It's that it doesn't affect you the same way. You know, if something happens and you're in a car accident and your car is totaled, you're, assuming nobody gets hurt, everybody walks away healthy, you're not suffering and broken up about the car being wrecked for days, weeks, however long. There isn't this carryover of misery because of the misfortune that befell you that resulted in this accident. Instead, an accident happens. If anything, you would go, great, no one's injured. And you go on with life. You do what you can to acquire another car or other form of transportation, and you just move on with life. You do what you can. You're not stuck by the events. You continue playing the world game. You're engaged with life. But none of it sticks to you. It doesn't stick to you. It's not something that you're attached to. And this is actually what they talk about when they talk about in Christian scriptures, living in the world but not of it. You're living in the world. You're still engaged. You're playing the world game. talking with people, you're maybe making a living, you're doing what you got to do. You're living in the world, but you're not of it. You realize that it is a game. You've seen through the game. The whole point is you've seen the non-dual nature of reality. So you've seen the sameness. And then you're looking with equanimity in that you see everything that is fundamentally the same. And then you're no longer playing the hierarchy game of this is superior, this is inferior. You might talk about it as a matter of convention if you're in a meeting and you gotta, say, rate products or something. But you know it's all part of the game. You're not really buying this is truly superior. Well, superior for who? Inferior for who? And so it is, I think, a trap to become aloof. It's a trap to see everything as equal. It's a trap to become disengaged and unaffected by the world. It is instead a matter of keeping engaged, still living in the world, but no longer suffering, no longer having things stick to you, no longer having it hang on you or carrying it with you. You let what comes come, you let what goes go. You're with what is. And in that way, you watch things come and go. And when you see things go, you know they had to go. It was inevitable. All forms go. Everything has to go. Everything is temporary. To think it would stay forever is delusion. And so, watching things come and go, it's not that big of a deal. It's not so serious. I like what Alan Watts said. He goes, it's playing the game sincerely, but not seriously. And so, we've played games with people where they take the game too seriously, and it becomes a must that they win. And if they don't win under what they consider to be winning, then they're unhappy and miserable. And if they don't win enough, they might quit playing or choose a different game or whatever. And those kind of people aren't that fun. But if you have somebody that's totally unaffected, aloof, not even trying to win, they're not even playing the game really. They're there, they're holding the cards, they're laying them down, but it's like they're arbitrarily, willy-nilly grabbing cards. It's just pure randomness. Those kind of people aren't fun to play with either. They're not trying to win. If anything, they're screwing up the flow of the game. No, the fun of the game is trying to win and playing with those trying to win. And so but at the same time, it's not a serious matter to win. It's not a serious game. You can sincerely try to win without taking it seriously. And in this way, you're playing the game of life in an engaged way. You're not aloof, but nor are you taking it too seriously. And I think this is also probably what the Buddha was also talking about regarding the middle way. I mean, this is another way of looking at the middle way. In Buddhism, one of the main ideas is the middle path. There's a middle point that is ideal. And the two extremes is taking the world very, very seriously and then suffering, or being totally aloof and untouched and nothing affects you. Both of those extremes, aren't really particularly, pleasant. I mean, if you're totally aloof and detached and everything, you may not even care that it's not that pleasant. But it's very meh. Life, it just continues. Time passes. You exist. So between these two extremes, there's a point where you're engaged, you're playing the game of life sincerely, and there can be joy, there can be awe, and these only arise when you're engaged, when you are engaged with life, not when you're aloof. The aloof are never in awe or joy. They're untouched. Why would if they're untouched, unfeeling, they're a stone Buddha. You could have the most fabulous sight before their eyes, and they're like, eh. But if you're in the kind of the middle ground that I'm talking about, you could be in the throes of awe, just go, wow, and that's just an experience. And that's a great thing to have in my mind. That is a tuned string. It's not too loose, not too tight. You can actually play with it. It's a analogy that the Buddhism and Buddha used, is if you have a string instrument, if the string is too tight, it snaps, suffering, things like that. If it's too loose, you can't play it. If you're just right, you can make a tune and play. And so if you're engaged in the world, you can experience joy, awe, and all these things. And it's a great thing, without the suffering and misery and stuff that comes when you're wound too tight. Anyways, that's kind of the stuff I wanted to cover today. If you got any questions, comments, please post below. And until next time, thank you much.